It feels like the Braves are going to add to the rotation this offseason, but who? We'll break it down next. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Monday, October 21st. Your source of news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. Follow me on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. He's Christian Rauh. Follow him on Twitter at Christian S. Rauh, R-A-U-H. Braves Today is on Twitter. It's on Facebook. It's on Instagram. We do have also, you can find all of our written work, bravestoday.com. And Christian, I wrote a little bit last week about the 40-man roster and about an opportunity to stash some injured guys and things like that nobody else could do. But one of the things that fans, I noticed, I got comments and stuff on, was talking about how many starters you had and how many starters you would likely need. The Atlanta Braves used between 10 and 13 true starters. So not counting a reliever as an opener, which they didn't do this year, but used between 10 and 13 conventional starters in each of the last 4 years, right? And so when you look right now on who is expected to come back, right? So we're not counting Max Fried because we don't know. We're not counting Charlie Morton because we don't know. Who is expected and like a lock to come back? You have 9 starters right now, okay? You have Chris Sale, Spencer Strider at some point in time next season. We don't know when. Spencer Schwellenbach, Ronaldo Lopez, Ian Anderson, AJ Smith-Shawver, Hurston Waldrop, Bryce Elder, and then they are stretching out Grant Holmes as a starter. So 9 guys that you are expected to have at some point in time in 2025 for your rotation. There are a couple others that are question marks. I personally don't think Dylan Dodd and Alan Winans are going to be back as rotation options, probably not the 40-man roster. Huascar Yano is a question mark. He has no minor league options. So if you bring him back on an arbitration deal, you can't send him down, right? At the end of spring training, if he doesn't make the roster, you can't send him down. Maybe he's good enough to be in the bullpen. We don't know. But because of that, it feels like this is going to be another offseason where Atlanta prioritizes adding to the rotation. Because the thing that you've learned from the last, I'd argue the last 4 postseasons, is health issues will always come up with your rotation when you get to October. And if you think about every single one of those seasons, there was some sort of health impact to your rotation. Charlie Morton broke a leg in the World Series, right? He didn't pitch again in that World Series. You look at 22, Strider's coming off an oblique. Fried had the flu. You look at last year, Fried came off the IL from the blister to pitch and didn't go well. Morton wasn't available with the finger sprain. You look at this one, you didn't have Chris Sale. And so if we're trying to figure out who to add to the rotation, there's a lot of different options. And we made a pretty extensive list, you and I did, that I want to go through it in this first segment before we get to some listener questions and suggestions about trades you can make in the second segment. And off the rip, I want to establish there's some guys, Corbin Burns, Blake Snell, etc., that Atlanta probably cannot afford, both from a salary perspective and from a qualifying offer and draft pick perspective. Is it right to just have those 2, or are there any others you think outside of those 2 that are probably up front off the table for Atlanta?
Yeah, those are definitely the 2 big names, and I don't see them spending that type of money and losing a qualifying offer, losing a draft pick, not in the AA era that we're in right now, the way that he's treated draft picks at a high premium. I think the only way that they spend that money in the offseason on a pitcher is if they bring back Max Fried. So, yeah, when you look at the rest of the names that are...
Sorry, real quick. Sorry to interrupt. For the qualifying offer, Atlanta's punishment is actually worse than just a draft pick. Because you are both a revenue sharing team, you pay into that, and you're already in the luxury tax. If you sign a player with a qualifying offer, you lose a 2nd round pick and a 5th round pick, plus $1 million of international pool space when you signed a qualifying offer player. So I think the only real option would be re-signing Max Fried. Any player that gets a qualifying offer, I'm going to argue, is out the window right now. I wanted Sonny Gray last year until Sonny Gray signed a qualifying offer or declined a qualifying offer. And so, like, Burns, Snell, Freed's going to get one from Atlanta. If he signs somewhere else, you get a post 4th round pick. It's farther back than previous years because you're in the CBT, but it's not one pick, it's 2 picks and international bonus pool space. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, that's even worse then. The fact that I thought it was just, I didn't read the thing. I probably should have read the qualifying thing that came out just a few days ago. I did not read that yet. But the fact that it's more than just a draft pick to me shows that definitely not going to spend, because the value that AA and the Braves have already looked at draft picks, you add even more to that as a possible penalty. To me, that shows that they're absolutely completely out the door on a guy like Burns or Snell. So I'm with you. I think the only way that they spend that amount of money in free agency is if they bring back Max Fried, at least in the pitcher's perspective. But I do think there's a lot of great names out there that are going to enter the free agent market. And I think we do have some good ideas for possible trades too, which we'll get later on. But overall, I think you're right. I think the two that you got to really just throw out the window now is the Braves are not going to sign Corbin Burns. The Braves are not going to sign Blake Snell. Let's get over those two names. Let's move on to some actual serious potential contenders to be in this Braves rotation in 2025.
Okay, so I broke it down into 4 or 5 different categories, and I'm just going to give you all the names, and for one category, and we're going to both say who we would pick out of that category, assuming the money can work. Granted, that's the big caveat here. Mid-rotation arms, right? So we're out of that very top tier ace level, right? Mid-rotation arms. Yusei Kikuchi went from the Blue Jays to the Astros. Andrew Heaney of the Texas Rangers. I believe he is not eligible for a qualifying offer because he's gotten one in the past. Matthew Boyd of the Cleveland Guardians. We both talked about him on First Pitch the other day about what he was able to do in the postseason. Nick Pivetta of the Boston Red Sox. And Luis Severino of the New York Mets, if he doesn't get the qualifying offer. To jump ahead briefly, Sean Manaea has an opt-out in his deal. So if he opts out, New York has to decide, do you give a qualifying offer to Severino or to Manaea? The other one, I think, would be an option as a mid-rotation arm, either Manaea or Severino, whichever one doesn't get that offer. Of those names, Kikuchi, Heaney, Boyd, Pivetta, Severino, Manaea, who do you like the most as a potential free agent signing if it fits in the budget for Atlanta?
Yeah, Braves fans might not like this, but Luis Severino would be a nice little fit for the Braves rotation. The way that he pitched last season, only age 30. He had a nice little resurgent with the Mets this last season, 3.91 ERA across 182 innings of work. Getting 180 innings from a 30-year-old guy, that's pretty good. Come on, that's one of the biggest things that the Braves are going to look for is, can they get longevity from some of these pitchers being in the middle or the back end of your rotation? Because as we mentioned, Lindsay, we don't know what's going on with Spencer Strider, how long he's going to be out. Those 9 guys you mentioned at the beginning of the show, with taking Strider out of the situation, so 8 of those guys, I can only really count on 3 or 4 to be true rotation guys that we've seen has some success in 2024. So adding a guy like Severino, I think would pretty huge. Be interesting to see what kind of money. And then Matt Boyd, I think, would be an actual interesting piece as well. My point here does not help with the longevity standpoint because he has only had a certain amount of innings over the last couple seasons. I think he's only had a total of about 200 innings across the last 5 seasons. Only had 40 innings in 2024, but when he was out there, sub 3 ERA, he looked great in the postseason. This could be one of those swing guys like the Grant Holmes situation where you could throw him in the bullpen or the back end of your rotation. He would fit, and I think he would be a low-cost 1-year prove-it deal that would probably fit in this budget quite well without having to drop any other ideas and still could go somewhere else. So those are the 2 that I see out of this list.
I feel like Boyd's probably going to end up getting a little bit more money in maybe a couple of years. I think you're going to have to pay him like he's a rotation guy, but I'm not opposed to the idea of doing that. My concern with Severino, he made 1 start in April and then 5 starts in every other month, right? Very consistent on that. But his ERAs month by month, 231, 497, 324, 581, 408, 364. It was very up and down over the course of the year. I do trust Atlanta on both of those guys to continue doing what they did this year and giving guys rest. I like the idea of adding the lefty Boyd simply because If when Freed leaves, whatever, you don't have a ton of lefties left. It's nice to you have Sale, you'd have Boyd the second lefty. I've gone on the stump before for Nick Pivetta. His fastball is tons of IVB, good velocity. Guys hit it for some reason. I don't know if he's lacking deception on it, if it's just a dead zone pitch or what. We got to figure that out. But I think that might be a project. I'm worried it might be a little too expensive of a project. I probably would rank these Boyd, Severino, Heaney, Pavetta, Kikuchi. I think it's probably how I rank these 5 guys. I'm assuming Minaya gets the qualifying offer. That's who I would give it to if I was New York.
Yeah, and I think Kikuchi's going to go back to the Astros. I think they gave up too much for him to be just a half-year rental, especially the way that their postseason ended and
They'll
what's
turn
all the
around
rest.
and re-sign him.
Yeah, so I think Kikuchi. I didn't even really think of him being as a potential option because I think he's going back to Houston.
True. Okay, I'd love to get one guy out of that group. Back in starters, I've got another list of 5 here. I know which one you're going to go to already, but Spencer Turnbull, Michael Lorenzen, Chris Flexen, Frankie Montas, Trevor Williams. You're going to say Trevor Williams. You're big on the Trevor Williams thing right now.
Yeah, I really like what Trevor Williams did with the Nationals this year. And despite his injury, even when he came back, he looked like he still had it. I think he's going to not cost that much money. I think we're going to probably see him in the 10, $12 million range. And I think that's a good number for a guy at 32 years old that pitched just over a 2 ERA. He was a 2.03 across his 66 innings pitched. He started off the year 6-1 on the year. And then he got hurt and he was out for a good amount of time. But when he came back, he looked just as good, Lindsay. I think that we're going to see a really good season out of Trevor Williams wherever he goes from the years past. I'm excited to see where he goes. I think he would fit perfectly in that Charlie Morton-esque role moving on at the back end of the rotation. I think he'd be an improvement from what we've seen over Charlie Morton over the last couple seasons. No knock on Morton. He's just aging. But at 32 years old, I think Trevor Williams would be a great asset, a great fit. Would be not a huge budget, conversation for the Braves. And again, would help them push in different directions and build on this depth, this roster construction. To me, it screams he's a Brave. I think he should be an Atlanta Brave.
Nice. I've got Spencer Turnbull. I've always liked Spencer Turnbull. He did a good job as a swingman for Philly this year. I think his ERA was under 3, career high in strikeout rate. His walk rate was down. Everything was good. And I think he's the kind of guy I think you can pay him like a back end starter. And with a little bit of improvement, he can flex up into something like a mid rotation guy. I don't know if he's starting postseason games for you. I think he's better than some of your other 5th starter options like Bryce Elder. But I do think that he would, cost wise, he would probably end up being a small guarantee. You could sign him for 2 or 3 years if you wanted, knowing you can throw him in the bullpen if you need to. I like Spencer Turnbull a lot. I think he could end up being a good value from this list. I wouldn't complain about Trevor Williams. I just worry about the trend of his velo dropping. Frankie Montas would be interesting to me. And we'll see what happens there. Going to speed it up a little bit here. Going on some of the rebound guys who either are currently injured or recovering from injury and have not looked good. Walker Buehler came back after Tommy John this year. We've talked about him on the show before. Shane Bieber is out because of Tommy John right now. Looked really good after an offseason at Driveline. Alex Cobb had rotator cuff surgery. Marco Gonzalez, Braves legend, had flexor surgery. Anthony DeScalfini had flexor surgery. Wade Miley had Tommy John. John Mean had his second Tommy John. Adrian Hauser was just bad. Michael Soroka was former Brave, obviously, was also pretty bad after he's had 3 Achilles surgeries and 2 ruptures and couldn't really make it work out in Chicago with the White Sox this year and is a free agent now. Of that group, knowing we've already both said we would not mind Walker Buehler on a reasonable deal, who else would be on your list for a potential rebound guy you could stash on the 40-man roster?
Let's talk about the former Brave, but not Soroka, right? How about John Means, 46 round pick by the Braves in 2011? Yeah, that's when they had 46 rounds
Good
back
pull.
then.
Yeah.
How about John Means? I think
Want to
he'd be an
clarify, folks,
interesting
he
piece.
didn't sign. He went to West Virginia, was redrafted in 2014 by the Orioles in the 11th round. So don't be confused. He didn't actually sign with Atlanta. He was a high school draftee who went to college. Sorry, go ahead.
That's true, but the Atlanta Braves are still already on his baseball reference card, so he's got a little bit of Atlanta Braves still. He's got Braves roots, right? Let's actually get him to Atlanta here. He hasn't had a full season since 2021, as you mentioned, second Tommy John surgery, but on his first full season with the Orioles, he was an all-star. He was second in AL Rookie of the Year voting. He still has a lot up his sleeve. I could see Baltimore wanting to maybe just change of scenery with this guy. He's a fan favorite. He's absolutely loved in the Baltimore Orioles community, like a guy that the Orioles and the Braves traded for a couple years back, Darren O'Day. Loved in Baltimore, was traded to Atlanta. Now he's talking on the radio for the Atlanta Braves. I could see John Means being a nice little piece for Atlanta coming over if they're willing to take the chance on a guy like him to see if he has what it takes. He's a great 40-man roster stash, as you mentioned. So how about him? I think John Means could be fun.
To be honest, when you mentioned a player traded from the Orioles to the Braves, I was thinking Kevin Gausman. I was not thinking Darren O'Day. Or if you talk about guys who played for both, I was thinking Nick Markakis, not Darren O'Day. I love Darren O'Day. Let me
Plenty
wrong.
of
I
names.
love Darren O'Day.
Plenty
But
of
not
names
who I
that you
was
could do
expecting.
between the Braves and the Orioles. That is an immaculate grid itself.
They have a lot of crossover, yeah. I like the idea of Shane Bieber. I'm worried about how much he's going to cost. A lot of these guys, I think your question's going to be, I would rather have the guy who is completely injured and is not going to pitch this year versus having a guy who has come back from injury and not look great, because you have less flexibility. And Atlanta's not in a position where they can really afford to carry somebody on the roster who is. So I'd rather have Shane Bieber over Walker Buehler, simply because you can stash him on the 40-man all year. You don't have to actually use him. And then in 26, then he can be a rotation option versus trying to integrate somebody mid-season. You saw Ian Anderson came back from Tommy John, was taken off of rehab, but stayed in the minors because he hadn't gotten to the point where he was better than the incumbent options for Atlanta. That's what I'm thinking about on this. So one of these guys who's going to be out, to me, is probably preferable. I've always liked Alex Cobb, though. I've always liked Alex Cobb. I don't think he'd be bad. Obviously, you'd take Bieber if you could afford him. I don't know what he's going to cost. I do also think it's relevant. I don't think you sign any of these, but we just have to mention real quick before break some of the aging veterans in the Charlie Morton role. Charlie Morton, he'll be 41 next month. He might want one more year. Alex Cobb, Patrick Corbin, Jose Quintana, Drew Smiley, Ross Stripling, Kyle Hendricks, Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander. I think the only guy I really take out of that, unless Morton wants to come back on a discount, is maybe Jose Quintana.
Yeah, I agree. I would love to see Justin Verlander resurge his career again in Atlanta, just because of being an old ODU guy myself. But
You're an old
I think
Dominican guy, yeah.
Quintana's the right name on this list if you're going to add any, for sure.
Okay. We'll take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to break down a couple trade ideas from listeners about trades you can make to reinforce the rotation. We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay, Crosby, Christian, Rauh. Reminder, you can find all of our written work, bravestoday.com. And we got some ideas from some of you guys about potential trades to reinforce the rotation and things like that. This is not shortstop trades. These are all pitching trades. But the first one was, I apologize, I don't remember who sent this to me. Luis Castillo of the Seattle Mariners. This is something I believe he is the most expensive player on their roster. They are looking for offense. They have a lot of pitching. Despite the recent comments from Jerry Dipoto, he indicated that on the continuum of plans A to plan Z, trading from the rotation is probably plan Z, but they're open to whatever ideas might make them better. They have a strikeout problem. They have for a couple seasons now. They don't get on base enough. They don't have enough power. I feel like you could maybe work out something where Jorge Soler and a piece or two go to the Seattle Mariners for Luis Castillo. You have a history of making deals with them. You took on Jared Kelenic last year. The cost of that was taking on some bad contracts and Evan White, Marco Gonzalez, and all that. I don't know, though, whether $8 million in savings is enough for them, because Castillo makes 24.1 next season. His luxury tax is under the Atlanta's $22 million limit. I have that in air quotes because we don't know for a fact it's a hard cap. But his cash payroll would be the highest on the roster at $24.15 million. But you'd have him until 2028. He has a vesting option then. I could see them maybe adding a year on to the back end of that just to adjust the salaries a little bit to keep him at 22 all the way through. Luis Castillo, good, bad? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Do you not care? Indifferent.
I like it. I just don't know if Dipoto is going to move on from his rotation, as you mentioned earlier. I just don't know if that's a feasible trade potential. Although I do think he has plenty of room to do. When you look at that
Mhm.
rotation of the Mariners with Logan Gilbert and George Kirby, Bryce Miller, Brian Wu, and then you got to know what is their plans on a guy like Emerson Hancock. Do they think he can take the next step to be that fifth guy in the rotation? If so, a guy like Luis Castillo, the one that's aging out of all those names that I mentioned going into his age 32 season, would be the
Mhm.
guy that you would want to move, in my opinion. Although you did spend a lot to go ahead and get him from the Cincinnati Reds a few seasons back. It
Noble
got them out of the
Marte,
playoff.
CES, yeah.
Yeah, it got them out of the playoff drought, but it didn't get them as far as they want to. So does Dipoto see that as a loss and wants to hold on to him to see if they can make that next step further in an AL West that seems to be a complete wild west that it's been over the last couple seasons? I'm not sure, but if you do make that trade, I think a Soler and a couple pieces, as you mentioned, would be a good fit. You talk about the strikeouts, you talk about the issues that Seattle has had over the last couple of years. It has a lot to do with their park. Their park factor is one of the worst in baseballs,
It's not
and it's
great.
because yeah, it's not good at all. And they strike out a lot. Adding a guy like Soler, I think, would be a good fit. He does fit that kind of scheme and that roster construction. And if you look at who's sitting in the outfield right now, you got Victor Robles and Randy Arozarena in the corner outfield spots for the Mariners. But Mitch Haniger, he's aging as well. You put him in the
Player
DH
option.
spot,
He might not even be there. He can chew 17.5 million or he can walk. I think that's one
right?
of your issues there.
Soler could be their DH of the future, but are you willing to trade a one of your star pitchers in your rotation as you're trying to get back to the postseason for only the second time in a very long time, Lindsay, for just the DH? I find that might be a tough ask for Jerry Dipoto and the Mariners, but it's not a bad idea.
I think if Seattle agrees to it without demanding one of your top pitching prospects, right? If you can get out of that without having to give one of your top 5 pitchers in the system, and you Soler in a non-top 5 pitcher, I think you do it. But again, I think the big question is, does Seattle do that or not? So there's your question there. 2 of them from the St. Louis Cardinals. One of them was Sonny Gray. One of them was Eric Fedde. Sonny Gray makes more sense. He is the most expensive player on this roster next year, $25 million. He's not a free agent until 2028. They have said they are taking a step back. They are trying to retool. They're probably not going to bring back Paul Goldschmidt because of that. So the cash owed to Sonny Gray is 25 million in 2025, 35 million in 2026, and then 30 million in 27 with a $5 million buyout. I do think Atlanta has to get some cash back in this deal. They will not want to just take on that straight salary because again, that makes him the highest paid player on the team, and that's just hasn't been something Atlanta's been willing to do for an outside guy. Even when they brought in Sale, they gave him an extension that conveniently lowered his salary to 22 million. So I could see them making this deal. I don't think St. Louis is going to want Jorge Soler back. You're probably giving them a pitching prospect, but I do think this is more of a salary dump. So you can probably do this without having to give up a top pitching prospect. How would you feel about Sonny Gray coming to Atlanta for his age 35 and 36 season and having a club option on 37?
I think it might cost a little more than what you're saying, in my opinion. He's
Right.
only 1 year removed from being the runner-up from the AL Cy Young, and that was against Garrett Cole
That's a good
when he
point.
was with the Minnesota Twins. So I think that Sonny Gray is going to take a little bit more if they're going to move on from him, even though the Cardinals are going to be taking a step back this season and retooling. This is a lame duck year for John Mozeliak, who's going to be
Mm-hmm.
giving up his roles to Chain Bloom. Look at these names coming in 2025. So I do think there's going to be some moves happening, but I think it's going to cost a little bit, whether it's a pitching prospect or some type of positional player. The Cardinals are going to be doing a lot of retooling. There's talks of Wilson Contreras being on the move. There's talks of Nolan Arenado being on the moves. I don't think it's going to
Those are
cost a
their
guy
three
like
high. Makes
I
sense.
don't think it's going to be a guy that's like a Drake Baldwin that needs to be moved to get Sonny Gray, but I'm sure that they would definitely be asking for it because they're still looking for their catcher of the future ever since Yadier Molina has left. I think it's going to cost a little bit more. It'll be interesting, but I think you're going to need to add some on the prospect side if they're going to want to get that cash dump to be a little lower in the eyes of AA and the rest of the Braves front office. But Sonny Gray on the Braves would be great. If you're talking about him potentially being your third starter, and that would be fantastic. Your
Oh my
third
gosh.
starter on the Braves, and you're a Cy Young runner-up just 2 years ago. That is a move that you make if you are ready to retool and get back to the World Series. That fits this Braves roster construction, in my mind, 100%.
This is another one. I think you got to have some cash in there. Honestly, the way that this organization just refuses to use young catchers, and my belief that Sean Murphy's going to rebound next year, I might move Drake Baldwin in this deal, right? If they chip in enough cash where you're not paying him more than 22 million a year, and just they're giving you cash in the next couple seasons, it's a backloaded contract. I may make this deal. It's not going to be very popular. Fans aren't going to want to hear that. Eric Fedde, I feel like that's a harder one to do simply because he only cost them, I think it's $7.5 million this year. I appreciated the suggestion that we got there. I just, as much as I am fine with Eric Fedde since he came back from Korea, he's been a different pitcher. He's been really good. I just don't feel like they're willing to budge on somebody as cheap as that simply because they need competency, and I think he's better than competent for the $7.5 million. I don't see that happening. I would take him, but I don't think I
Eric
don't.
Fedde screams like a guy that's going to be traded at the trade deadline yet again in
It is an expiring
2025.
deal, so I could see.
Yeah.
I absolutely could see that moved at the deadline. If you could get him early, you do it. I just don't think you can. The last listener suggestion: Austin Gomber from Colorado. This came out of my tweet that I put out yesterday about how Austin Gomber has been just unstoppable in Truist Park. He is reportedly on the move, or one of those guys that they're looking to move on from. $5.6 million projection for his final year of arbitration. In his career in Truist Park, 13 and a third innings, 12 strikeouts. He's 2-0 with a 1.35 ERA. And on September 5th, he held Atlanta to 1 run on 5 hits in 8 innings with 6 strikeouts and no walks. He doesn't throw incredibly hard. He's one of those, he's throwing 90 to 92 on the heater. But $5 million, give me Austin Gomber 7 days a week and Sunday after church. You can probably, I trust this scouting department to look in their system for an undervalued shortstop that they want. I do not think they're going to move on from Ezekiel Tovar. They gave him an extension. I don't think they're going to move on from him. That's dumb. But you can go find a young position player, middle infielder that you like in their system and ask for him in the deal as well. I'm not opposed to Austin Gomber. I do think he'd be your back end, a 5 or a swingman type, but I'm not opposed to Austin Gomber.
Do you think maybe a potential combo deal with a guy from the Rockies as well, adding Kale Quantrill into the deal? He's supposed to make a lot of money, though, like almost $10 million, and he's a 1-year deal in 2025. But adding Gomber and Quantrill together for a salary dump, you probably could get them both for some very cheap deals and could be some good back end guys.
I don't hate Cal Quantrill. He made 29 starts last year, ERA of almost 5. I do think a lot of that is Colorado, obviously. I don't hate the idea of Cal Quantrill. I do worry about them getting an expiring deal like that, paying more money. But either way, maybe you do both. They have a great history of making trades with Colorado. Pierce Johnson worked out. Brad Hand did not, but Pierce Johnson did. So I'm not opposed. If there's more trade ideas, or I guess let us know what you think about these players, both the free agency guys and the trades. Let us know what you think. And if you have any questions or suggestions about this, let us know. Again, I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. He's on Twitter at Christian S. Rauh, R-A-U-H. You can leave them on YouTube in the comments down below. Either way, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, leave us a 5-star review, and we will see you next time on Braves Today.